Do you do any indirect cooking on your grill? I do it all the time. And I'm going to share 4 tips which will make your grilling experience a lot easier. For this video today, I'm going to be demonstrating using my good old Weber kettle, but the principles apply to almost any grill. Tip number 1, use containers to hold your fuel. By containers, I mean something like these. These are Weber charcoal briquette holders. There's many other things on the market which you can use to contain your fuel within the cooking chamber. Another item that comes to mind is the slow and sear, which keeps your charcoal over here. It has a little water barrier in between that and the cooking side where the meat would be. The reason you want to use containers to have the best indirect grilling experience is it allows you to contain the fuel in specific areas. It doesn't spread out and avalanche in different areas. Now, you could pile all your charcoal on one side over here, but it can spread. By using baskets, it allows you to contain the fuel and position it where you want easily. What I've done with these briquette holders is I've used them without any briquettes in them. I've simply done this and this to create a larger well over here. This contains the charcoal here. It's not going to spread this way. Another handy aspect to containers is if it is containing the charcoal and you get that buildup of ash in there and you want to get that ash off without knocking charcoal everywhere, I use tongs. I just pick this up and shake it. The ash drops through the bottom, still containing the lit charcoal, and makes it easy to add more. Also, if you are using a grill grate that has flip-up ends, it makes it much easier to add charcoal directly into a container and not just drop it on a mound where it's then going to roll into the center directly under the meat. Another container I like to use when I'm cooking indirect is this Vortex. You can put charcoal in there, create an extreme amount of heat, put your meat around the outside on the grill grate, things like chicken wings, chicken legs, pork chops, anything like that. By containing that charcoal, you're concentrating the heat and concentrating the fire, which is then forced up into the cooking chamber. With the dome lid on, it's circulating back around. If you were just to make a pile in the center, you're not concentrating it. By using something like the Vortex, you're concentrating the energy of the fire for indirect cooking where you want it, so it's not directly under the meat, it's in the center. Now, this Vortex can also be used in an opposite manner. You can turn it upside down without the grill grate on and put a chicken on a beer can chicken holder here, charcoal all around, and this creates radiant heat, which really crisps up the chicken here in an indirect manner. There is no fire directly under the meat. It's all coming at it from the sides using this Vortex. Tip number 2, surround your food or rotate your food. So when you're cooking indirect, if you're cooking on just one side, that's fine. Your meat is going to be over here on the cooking grate on this side. Your fuel is going to be in here, your charcoal briquettes. This side of your meat, which is closest to the fuel, is going to get most of the energy. You're still going to get cooked on the other side, but you're going to get an excess amount here. So if you're only using one side, you're going to need to pick up your meat, rotate it, turn it, generally about every 20 to 30 minutes, depending on how hot your fire is. Preferably surround your meat. Charcoal baskets on both sides. Meat in the center, a drip pan right here. You're then going to get a flow of meat from both sides. You could still rotate it so that these sides get here, but generally you don't need to. If you're putting a chuck roast or something like that in here, or racks of ribs, surrounding your meat will give it a more even cook all the way around without the need to rotate it as often. Tip number 3, use the right amount of fuel and the right kind of fuel. Let me tackle the right kind of fuel aspect of this first. I love using lump charcoal, but lump charcoal generally comes in uneven sizes and pieces. You can definitely cook with it indirect, but if you're trying to manage your temperature over a longer period of time, things like charcoal briquettes, which are an even size and generally burn about the same time and temperature, you can dial in that temperature a lot easier with briquettes. If you use lump, unless you have exact same size pieces, it's going to be more difficult. Also, in my experience, good lump charcoal tends to burn a lot hotter. Now that means you could use less, but then you get back into that thing of, wait, I'm adding big pieces, little pieces. My preference is to use briquettes when I'm doing indirect cooking. I save the lump for direct cooking because I love the flavor that comes off it when you're grilling directly over it. Now, as important as the type of fuel is the amount. If you fill one of these baskets up brimming with charcoal briquettes and you get it going blazing and you put the lid on your grill, it's going to race up to a super high temperature. I've gotten it up with just one basket up to nearly 600 degrees. And when you're doing indirect, that isn't always the best thing. Sometimes you want a high temperature, but generally for indirect, in my experience, you're wanting it for more of a lower and slower cook. So the amount of fuel you use is critical. You can always add more. It's very difficult to take burning charcoal off, and it's a waste. So start with less. If I'm going to be doing an indirect cook and I'm only using one basket in here and I'm shooting for about 300 degrees, I'm going to start with like 10 briquettes and get those going. I can add more if I want it hotter. Or as time goes on and I need to extend the time of that cook, I can add more. But if I've already got it going with 25, 30 briquettes in here, it's going to be difficult to bring that temperature down to where I want it. Tip number 4. Leave the lid closed. When you're cooking indirect, you're basically using an oven. Just in your kitchen, if you kept opening the oven door, it would throw off the cook. Instead of worrying how the food's doing or needing to open it and use a instant read thermometer to check the temperature of the meat, get a remote thermometer. Set one probe at grate level, not over the coals, and the other probe in your meat. That way you don't need to keep taking the lid off. Now, if you're doing things like ribs, you don't need to take the lid off anyway, except occasionally to spritz it, or if you're going to be wrapping it. Generally, if you put it on and your temperature is staying where you want it to, leave the lid closed. One of the hardest things to get used to when you're indirect grilling, if you haven't done it before, is that whole aspect of leaving it alone. Putting the lid on, ignore it. Just watch your temperature here, whether it's the grate temperature. If it's getting too hot, adjust your vents, or the meat temperature, seeing where you're at and what you're shooting for. If you spend any amount of time at the grill, especially doing indirect grilling, you're going to come up with your own things that you do, your own methods. And if any of you have tips for indirect grilling, leave them in the comments below. I'd love to see them. I hope you enjoyed this video. Feel free to check out the other videos on my channel and consider subscribing. And if you do, click that bell for notifications. Thank you all for watching. Hope you have a great day. My voice is almost better. I'll see you again soon.